Imagine a man who once rode beside the saintly Joan of Arc, his sword gleaming in the sun as he carved a path through English armies, only to descend into an abyss of depravity that would make the devil himself blush. This is no fairy tale, it's the blood-soaked story of a nobleman turned nightmare, a tale so horrific it still sickens people almost 800 years later. Today we're diving deep into the life, the battles, the horrors, and the fiery end of Gilles de Rais, the medieval serial killer who shocked the world. Our story begins in the turbulent year of 1404 or perhaps 1405. The records are as murky as the Loire River that snaked through his ancestral lands. Gilles de Montmorency-Laval, better known as Gilles de Rais, was born into opulence in the foreboding castle of Champtocé, nestled in the heart of Anjou, France. His father, Guy de Laval, was a powerful lord, and his mother, Marie de Craon, came from equally illustrious stock. Little Gilles was the heir to a fortune that could make kings envious, vast estates sprawling across Brittany, Anjou, and Poitou, teeming with serfs, forests, and riches beyond counting. But fate, that cruel temptress, had other plans. In 1415, when Gilles was just a boy of 10 or 11, tragedy struck like a bolt from the heavens. Father died in a gruesome hunting accident, gored by a wild boar in the dense woods of his domain. Mere months later, his mother followed him to the grave, succumbing to illness. Orphaned and vulnerable, Gilles and his younger brother René were thrust into the guardianship of their maternal grandfather, Jean de Craon, a man as ruthless as he was ambitious. Jean de Craon wasted no time molding his grandson into a weapon of fortune. He arranged a marriage that would catapult Gilles into even greater wealth. At the tender age of 16, Gilles wed Catherine de Thouars, a union that brought him the baronies of Rais and La Suze, swelling his holdings to staggering proportions. By his early 20s, Gilles was one of the richest men in France, his coffers overflowing with gold from rents, taxes, and the spoils of his lands. But wealth alone wasn't enough for this young noble. He craved action, glory, the thunder of hooves, and the clash of steel. The 100 Years' War raged on, pitting France against the invading English hordes, and Gilles, trained from boyhood in the arts of war, was eager to prove himself. Enter the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc, the teenage visionary whose divine voices propelled her to lead France's armies. It was 1429, and France teetered on the brink of collapse. The English had besieged Orleans, the key to the Loire Valley, and morale was in tatters. Joan, clad in shining armor, arrived like a miracle, rallying the troops with her unshakable faith. And who should join her side but the dashing Gilles de Rais? At 25, he was already a seasoned knight, his prowess on the battlefield whispered about in royal courts. Gilles was appointed as Joan's personal protector, tasked with guarding her life amid the chaos of war. Picture it Gilles, tall and imposing with his flowing dark hair and piercing eyes, riding astride a massive war horse, his banner fluttering in the wind as he charged into the fray. Their first triumph came at the siege of Orleans. Joan, with Gilles at her elbow, inspired the French forces to launch a daring assault. Gilles led charges against the English fortifications, his sword hacking through enemy lines in a frenzy of blood and fury. The English, stunned by the ferocity, broke and fled. Orleans was liberated and France dared to hope again. But the battles were far from over. Gilles fought valiantly at Jargeau, where Joan's forces stormed the town, Gilles personally scaling the walls and engaging in hand-to-hand combat that left rivers of gore in his wake. Then came Meung-sur-Loire and Beaugency, where Gilles' tactical brilliance shone, ambushes in the mist-shrouded dawn, cavalry charges that shattered English ranks. The crowning glory was the Battle of Patay in June 1429, a slaughter so complete that the English lost over 2,000 men while the French suffered mere handfuls. Gilles, covered in the grime of victory, was hailed as a hero. King Charles VII, crowned at Reims thanks to Joan's campaigns, bestowed upon him the title of Marshal of France, the youngest ever at just 25. Medals, lands, and adulation poured in. Gilles de Rais was the golden boy of France, a warrior saint fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Holy Maid. Yet even in these heroic days, shadows lurked. Gilles' temper was legendary, quick to rage. He once nearly killed a man in a dispute over precedence. and his devotion to Joan, some whispered it bordered on obsession, a lurid fascination with her purity and power. When Joan was captured by the Burgundians in 1430 and handed over to the English, Gilles was devastated. He attempted a rescue, rallying troops for a daring raid on Rouen, but it failed. Joan burned at the stake in 1431, her screams echoing across Europe. Gilles, heartbroken and disillusioned, retired from the military life. He returned to his castles, Tiffauges, Machecoul, Champtocé, vast fortresses that loomed like brooding giants over the countryside. With the war's end in sight, Gilles turned to indulgence, and oh, what indulgences they were. His fortune, estimated at over 1,000,000 livres, enough to fund entire armies, began to evaporate in a whirlwind of extravagance. Gilles assembled a private army of 200 knights, all clad in opulent uniforms, parading like peacocks. He built a lavish chapel at Machecoul, complete with a choir of boy sopranos whose angelic voices masked darker desires, but his true passion was the theater. Gilles staged massive spectacles, reenactments of his battles with Joan, complete with hundreds of actors, costumes sewn with gold thread, and feasts that could feed villages. One production alone cost him 80,000 écus, a king's ransom. To fund this madness, he sold off lands, borrowed recklessly, and delved into forbidden arts. Alchemy became his obsession, turning lead into gold to replenish his coffers. He hired charlatans like Francois Prelati, an Italian sorcerer who promised demonic pacts for unlimited wealth. And here, viewers, is where the story turns truly sensational, plunging into a lurid nightmare that defies comprehension. Around 1432, as his debts mounted and his sanity frayed, Gilles de Rais crossed into the realm of unspeakable evil. Whispers spread through the villages, children vanishing without a trace. Boys, mostly peasant lads aged 6 to 18, lured from the roads with promises of sweets, coins, or service in the baron's grand household. Gilles' accomplices, his loyal servants Poitou, Henriette Griart, and others, scoured the countryside like wolves, snatching the innocent. What happened next in the bowels of his castles? Oh, the horrors! Gilles confessed to it all, in lurid detail that sent shudders through the courts. The crimes unfolded in a ritualistic frenzy, blending occult madness with sadistic pleasure. Gilles, clad in black robes embroidered with arcane symbols, would retire to his private chambers, a dimly lit dungeon reeking of incense and fear. The child would be brought in, trembling, eyes wide with terror. Gilles, his face twisted in ecstatic madness, would begin the torment. He delighted in the screams, the pleas for mercy that echoed off stone walls. Torture was his art, bindings, whips, blades that danced across tender flesh, drawing blood in crimson rivulets. The killings were varied, each more grotesque than the last, some strangled with silken cords, their faces turning purple as life ebbed away, others beheaded with a single savage stroke, heads rolling across the floor like macabre toys. A few disemboweled, their innards spilled in steaming piles for demonic offerings. But it wasn't just murder. Gilles' depravity knew no bounds. He engaged in acts so vile, so against nature, that chroniclers could barely commit them to parchment without retching. Sodomy, necrophilia, the bodies defiled even in death, posed in lewd tableaus for his amusement, and the rituals. With Prelati chanting incantations, Gilles attempted to summon demons like Baron and Beelzebub, offering the children's blood and organs as sacrifices. Heads were severed and placed on altars, bodies hung from hooks to drain like slaughtered livestock. The remains burned in massive fireplaces, ashes scattered to the winds or dumped in moats. Estimates vary. Gilles confessed to 140 victims, but some say as many as 800, their bones unearthed in pits beneath his castles. Villages emptied of children, parents wailed in the night, cursing the baron's name. For 8 long years, from 1432 to 1440, this reign of terror gripped Brittany, a lurid shadow over the land. What drove him? Was it the loss of Joan, shattering his faith and unleashing inner demons? The thrill of power, absolute and unchecked, or the occult siren call promising riches in exchange for souls? Whatever the spark, Gilles de Rais became history's first recorded serial killer, a monster in human skin, but even monsters fall. In 1440, Gilles' arrogance sealed his doom. Desperate for cash, he sold his castle at Champ-de-Say to the Duke of Brittany's brother, but then reoccupied it by force, kidnapping a cleric in the process, an act of sacrilege that outraged the church. The Duke, Jean saw his chance. Gilles was arrested on September 15, 1440 at Machecoul, his castle stormed by armed men. Dragged to Nantes, he faced dual trials, ecclesiastical for heresy and sorcery, secular for murder. The proceedings were a spectacle of sensational horror. Witnesses poured forth, parents recounting vanished sons, servants like Poitou and Henriette spilling confessions under torture's threat. Gilles, initially defiant, strutted into court in finery, mocking the charges. But when faced with the rack's grim instruments, iron claws, boiling oil, bone-crushing vices, he crumbled. On October 21, he confessed everything in a torrent of lurid detail, begging for absolution. The court gasped as he described the killings, the rituals, the defilements. Convicted on all counts, he was sentenced to death, hanging, then burning, his body to be interred in a church, a mercy for his repentance. October 26, 1440 dawned cold in Nantes. A massive crowd gathered, baying for blood. Gilles, Poitou, and Henriette were led to the gallows on the Isle de Bis. Gilles mounted the scaffold first, his face pale but composed. "Pray for me," he urged the mob, then dropped into eternity as the noose tightened. His body, cut down before fully dead, was tossed onto a pyre, flames leaping hungrily. But in a final twist, nuns snatched his charred remains for burial, honoring his noble blood. And so ended Gilles de Rais, hero, monster, enigma. Was he guilty or a scapegoat for political intrigue? Debates rage to this day, but the lurid legacy endures. He inspired Bluebeard, that tale of hidden horrors behind locked doors. France never forgot. His name became synonymous with ultimate evil. If this chilled your subscribe now for more historical horrors. What do you think? Was Gilles framed or pure evil? Drop your thoughts below. Until next time, stay curious and watch your back.